Dear students, today we are going to deal a very brief topic, and this topic has been selected for the students of literature, and this was a presentation made to a undergraduate college in Tenkasi district. So the topic is entitled Exploring Subaltern Studies, Historiographic Approaches for Literary Narratives. Now you could understand that this particular presentation was made for the undergraduate literature, English literature students. However, you have to understand that subaltern is a word that has made strides into every field of academic studies. And among the audience, there were students of commerce, business administration, computer science, so on and so forth. And in order to make all of them beneficial, a superfluous understanding of subaltern studies has been discussed. And as I have already underlined my limitation, this particular presentation is made for undergraduate studies, and therefore this does not incorporate the depth of subaltern studies. In the introductory stage, we should understand that subaltern studies emerged as an offshoot of Marxism. So Marxist history, it made a huge impact across the world. As an academic methodology, it was very successful and profoundly used by great many scholars. So this particular Marxism, it introduced economic deterministic theory based on dialectical materialism. So there is a constant class war in the society, and the class war contributed for the evolution of one stage to another. When outlining various stages, Karl Marx finds socialism as an important stage wherein there will be a constant class war between the working classes and the middle class, proletariat and the bourgeoisie. However, it did not include the agrarian wage laborers. In the late 18th and 19th century, industrial revolution took place in a very great manner in Europe, and therefore Karl Marx romantically viewed the industrial labor class as holding potential of taking this world to another level, and through the dictatorship of industrial workers there will be a communist regime. So Karl Marx is trying to forecast that there will be a communist regime wherein the dictatorship of the proletariat over bourgeoisie will take place. But however, he did not incorporate the agrarian workers or the agrarian landholders. Liberal Marxist scholars like D.D. Kosami, R.S. Sharma and others in India, they incorporated agrarian wage earners into their study. So classical Marxists, however, did not to a huge extent give space for agrarian wage earners, but liberal Marxists, they gave adequate space. However, the word subaltern was coined by Antonio Gramsci of Italy. In his prison notebooks, he is writing that subaltern with the meaning of marginal class. Similarly, Mao Zedong, who was a follower of Lenin, he was in the beginning thinking of revolutioning the labor class, but however he could not materialize that, and therefore he viewed the agrarian labor as having potential to evolve and work for a revolution. And he capitalized on that. Therefore, agrarian working class and tribal people, they had immense resources as human beings to change the history of the world. And this has been realized by many, including Antonio Gramsci and the subaltern writers like Ranajit Guha. Subsequently, subaltern thinking was also inspired by Foucault's, French historian Foucault's writings. And Foucault, in his work, he states that living in one epistome, you cannot understand the features of another epistome. He divides the historical processes into epistome. So, in an epistome, the ideas that are born are attaining maturity and dies, and a new epistome is born in the next stage. And this is the theoretical background of Foucault, the French historian. Rajan Gurukul of Kerala, he became Vice Chancellor of Mahatma Gandhi University as well. He attempted to view ancient Tamil history through the ideas of Foucault's epistome. See, it is very difficult to understand the concepts of Foucault being a historian. And therefore, when Foucault was about to appear before his department members for his promotion, the Department of History, the members of the Department of History, they did not vote in his favor. Leopold von Ranke's grammar of history, it only necessitated the presence of evidence based on literary or archaeological or even documentary and so on and so forth, and this has to be accommodated or incorporated without questioning the document. So whatever is present in the document or in the evidence, you have to incorporate according to the theories or the principles of Leopold von Ranke. But for instance, the literary ideas that have been in the making at one period, what were the motives behind them and what were the details of them, we cannot understand. So in earlier period, people married far early. So even before attaining puberty, girls were married. And what prompted this, you cannot surely understand and make judgment out of that. And therefore, they have lived in a very different epistome. And you living in an epistome of people marrying after attaining the age of 18. So people after 18 are called majors, and people below the age of 18 are called minors these days. And living in this epistome, you cannot understand the social life of a people who have lived in a very different epistome. That is the argument of Michel Foucault. There are alternatives to this kind of thought also. For instance, D.D. Kosambi, he argues in favor of history at the doorstep. So he is inquiring into a coin. He is making a numismatical study with the support of a coin, wherein he found a farmer carrying a plough. And when he was looking straight, he found a farmer wearing a piece of cloth, loin cloth, and carrying a plowshare, same like what has been viewed in the coin. And therefore, he said that for a very long period, based on material culture, we could effectively say that people have lived in the same epistome or same materialistic period. And this is a major argument by D.D. Kosambi, and similarly R.S. Sharma in his work Material Culture and Social Formation in Ancient India, he has also distinguished people based on the pottery they have used. Northern black polished, red and grey ware, black and red ware. Similarly, he evolved maps, Indian maps, and he tried to give a picture of where the particular people of ceramic culture they lived, and tried to distinguish and differentiate people from one another. So this is a major work and contribution of the Marxist historians, which provides a revisive critique of subaltern thinking. And now you should understand that subaltern thinking places much importance on observation verification methods. In one of my earlier lectures, I have mentioned that this very historical inquiry of the Indians are adjunct to the European methods, and innovation has to be started. So, post colonial debates they rose and they attempted to give a broad picture of history based on contemporary issues and events. Historians of the modern era they very well understood that colonial rule caused deindustrialization, and colonialism was a very great intervention, and it was a major rupture in the historical process of India. And from a rich nation economically, the Indians were ruined and they are deindustrialized. And that is what people like Dadabhai Nauroji and R.C. Dutt they attempted to project in their works. There were many kind of textiles in India. So when we are to discuss about deindustrialization, the major part pertains to textiles, which were double taxed when they were imported in England, whereas their product which were marketed in India were made tax free, and it became naturally cheaper, and the Indian products that went to England became costly. So nationalism and nation rebuilding it did not attempted to bring into life all the types of textile manufacturing. Rather, the simplest and crude form is khadi, and even Gandhi he attempted to bring forth into life this khadi and handloom industries based on that only. Similarly, there were man-made famines during the British colonial era due to hoarding, misgovernance, and unscientific system of taxation. So, the Nobel laureate and noted economist Amartya Sen, he was a product of Bengal famine, and he constantly says that the impact of Bengal famine he himself had experienced and observed, and therefore he tried to give a revisive critique of the misgovernance and what kind of governance we should evolve in the post independence era. Moreover, people like Edward Said they were bringing forth ideas such as Orientalism, and they attempted to project countries including India in new light, as because the history writing of the Indians was once considered as burden of the Western people, and not only Western writers but also the readers they thought that countries like India were introduced into path of progress only through the Westerners, and it was their burden to modernize us. In fact, the glorious past of India was destroyed by the colonial rule, and the natural resources of India and neighboring countries were robbed by the colonial powers. In such a context of debate, the subaltern studies were introduced, and the idea was formed at University of Sussex, England, and it was influenced by Ranajit Guha and Eric Stokes. Eric Stokes is a very important historian of India, although he is a Westerner. He viewed the 1857 revolt in a very different angle. He found every soldier as a peasant in uniform. So, this kind of an assessment was new, and he found the first war of Indian independence as a peasant uprising. Inspired by Ranajit Guha, important subaltern historians emerged in India, and they are chiefly Sumit Sarkar, David Arnold, Jnanendra Pandey, Partha Chatterjee, and others. There were 12 volumes of subaltern studies, and the first two volumes were a high romantic type of writing, and they became speechless for Foucault's writings on study of power and knowledge was greatly instrumental in silencing the subsequent contributors of subaltern studies. Foucault argues about social control through multiple institutions, and therefore, even at the grassroots level, there had been controlling mechanism, and there will be a dialogue of this grassroots mechanism with the central power seated somewhere else. So, here we have to remember the work of Buttonstein, who theorized on segmentary state based on Chola history. So, he argues that in Chola history, the local self government was very strong. However, there had been a dialogue between the local self government and also the central government seated in Tanjavur, which vastly ruled the country, and they gave the authority for the local self government to work on an independent basis. Therefore, subsequent writings of our Foucault, it greatly affected the subaltern writings, and subaltern became not very popular among every academic circle. However, subaltern was not placed into disuse. Rather, now ideas such as race, class, gender, personal orientation, ethnicity, religion, so on and so forth, are all brought under the banner of subaltern studies. New debates and orientations are being evolved from subaltern studies, which are immensely contributing for literary narratives. Particularly, new feminist epistemological questions are being evolved by thinkers such as Gayatri Spivak, Susi Tharu, Sarojini Sahu, and others. So, Gayatri Spivak is a very great literary critic who is also trying to evoke important questions, and she, on a basis of Eurocentrism, asks, can the subaltern speak? So, subalterns are represented by others who are of elitist background, and this is what she is asking. So, following that, another activist who calls herself as a critic of subaltern studies, Susi Tharu, she is evoking another important question, and she tries to shake the basis and basement of feminism, and she questions why feminism does not include Dalit, and Muslim women. Apart from these two, Sarojini Sahu, a creative writer and who wrote Gambhiri Gara, an Odia novel translated as Dark About in 2008, and Sensible Sensuality in 2010. She has attempted to redefine femininity with Indian perspective. She denies Simone de Beauvoir's The Other Theory, and she redefined femininity with Indian perspective. So, in India, popular feminist perspectives or theories are the British Marxist, the American feminist, and the French feminist. And most of the Indian feminists, they were in favor of British Marxism earlier. But Gambhiri Gara author Sarojini Sahu, she redefines femininity with an Indian perspective. Thus, she is liberating the idea of feminism from the clutches of colonialism. You have to understand that these scholars, women scholars, they have immensely contributed for evoking a very harmonious debate in the field of academics, particularly in subaltern studies. In this present lecture, I pointed at Indian historians trying to decolonize themselves from the influences of Western writers and historians. However, they impacted the Latin American historians and writers and historians like Walter Mignolo, Abdul Karim Mustafa, Patricia Seed, and others. They produce their work inspired by South Asian subaltern ideas. Subaltern studies wanted to liberate itself from the grammar of Western historical ideas. But Latin American historians, they are following Indian historians and imitating their methodology and producing their work in this light. Lately, Vivek Shibar, an American sociologist and author of Postcolonial Theory and the Spectre of Capital, he argues that subalterns have underplayed class formation and class struggle. A major idea we have to deal here is Marxism and its forecast of history going into certain path cannot be accepted. However, we have to provide adequate space for Marxist ideas of the past. Class struggle has taken place, and there has been a constant struggle between the working class and the exploitative class, or the exploitative mechanism that was present in almost every country in one form or another. So, this has not been completely disproved or refuted by subaltern historians. That we have to accept. So, the major contribution of Marxism is viewing the past history, and Karl Marx starts his work, Communist Manifesto, with the sentence that hitherto the history of the world had been history of class struggles. So, this very hypothesis or hypothetical statement has to be disproved if you are to frame new ideas. Otherwise, whatever idea you are trying to handle will be only part of the economic deterministic theory of Karl Marx, and that is what Vivek Chibber is also saying. And I have also in the beginning of my lecture said that subaltern history is an adjunct of Marxist history. So, while saying subalterns have underplayed class formation and class struggle, Vivek Chibber also states that they have overplayed class exploitation. For example, when saying that deindustrialization was caused by the colonial powers, you have to understand that these industries were supported locally by the lords and nobles who had a very great purchasing power, and they patronized the development of these ancient industries. So, viewing all categories as exploitative mechanism is also not justifiable, and therefore Vivek Chibber's argument is also right, and the subaltern historians have to answer such questions, and then only a holistic view of history could be answered by the subaltern historians. With these perspectives or ideas, I wish to conclude my lecture. Thank you very much.